I never thought a simple garden could spark an international scandal. After 30 years of serving my country as a U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, I had finally retired, settling into a quiet corner of Maple Ridge Estates. I imagined peaceful mornings, tending to my collection of rare heritage crops, plants I had gathered from across the world. These weren't just vegetables, they were living pieces of history, carrying genetic resilience that could help fight famine, drought, and disease. Afghan purple carrots that thrived in arid soil, Peruvian beans that grew in the poorest conditions, and a delicate Himalayan blue poppy thought to be extinct. My backyard was more than a garden, it was a piece of global research, part of the UN Global Seed Preservation Initiative. But that didn't matter to Eleanor Whitfield. It started on an otherwise perfect Tuesday afternoon. I was watering seedlings in the warm sun when her shadow fell across my fence line. The unmistakable click of expensive heels on pavement made me glance up. There she stood, clipboard in hand, pearl necklace gleaming, her smile tight and cold. "Ambassador Bennett," she said, her tone sugar-coated with condescension. "I see you've been landscaping." I set down the watering can and gave her my most diplomatic smile. "Good afternoon, Eleanor. These raised beds are allowed under Section 4.3 of the bylaws. I double-checked before building." Her eyes narrowed. "Maybe so, but the plants inside them, well, they're unsightly. The HOA expects manicured lawns, not alien vegetables. These are heritage crops," I explained gently. "Some of them could help farmers survive climate change. This carrot here could grow in deserts. That bean over there could thrive where soil is almost barren." She sniffed, unimpressed. "The board meets next Thursday. Clean this up before then, or we'll take action." She turned on her heel and walked away. I noticed Victor Hayes, my neighbor, watching from his porch. He shook his head slowly, then went inside. That evening, Victor texted me, "Watch out for Eleanor. She targeted my bird sanctuary last year. Cost me $900 in fines." The next morning, a violation notice was taped to my mailbox, signed by Douglas Montgomery, HOA president. I tried to reason with him, but his silver-haired smile was all business. "Rules are rules," he said flatly. As I walked home, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't about property values, it was about control. And I was about to become their next target. The next few days blurred into a haze of meetings and international briefings as I flew to Geneva for an urgent UN conference. But my mind never left my garden. Each night, after long hours of negotiation, I'd check my phone for updates from Victor. He assured me all was quiet, but his last message, "I think they're planning something," sat heavy in my chest. Before boarding my flight home, I couldn't shake a sense of dread. When I landed and powered on my phone, a flood of messages greeted me. All from Victor. "Come home now. It's bad." I tried to stop them. My heart pounded in my chest as I raced through customs, barely registering the drive from the airport. Pulling into my driveway, I found Victor pacing on my front lawn, his face pale, eyes filled with regret and anger. He didn't say a word, just motioned for me to follow. I rounded the corner into my backyard, and the breath left my body. My garden, my living archive of rare, endangered plants, was dead. The soil was blackened, the once vibrant leaves wilted and brown. The unmistakable chemical stench hung in the air like a cruel joke. I knelt beside the plot that once held Afghan purple carrots, now shriveled and gray, and gently lifted a fragile stem that crumbled between my fingers. I didn't have to ask. Victor handed me his phone. He had recorded the entire event from his window. There, on the screen, under cover of night and wearing gloves and masks, were Eleanor Whitfield and Douglas Montgomery. They moved with precision, spraying the garden with containers marked by bright skull and crossbones warnings. Eleanor even paused to pose for a picture in front of the dying plants. Victor's voice trembled. They told me they had HOA approval and official documents. I tried to stop them, but they threatened to fine me for interference. I watched them kill everything you spent years building. I felt cold rage rise in my chest. Do you know what they've done? These plants weren't just mine, they were part of a UN-sanctioned preservation project. Some of these species don't exist anywhere else. They didn't just destroy my garden. They destroyed potential solutions for food shortages, droughts, and medical research. Victor's face fell. I didn't realize. I straightened, brushing dirt from my knees, my mind already moving. I need that video. He nodded, already sending it to me. What are you going to do? I looked out at the destruction one more time. I'm going to make a call. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at my dining table with the video on loop. I called Maria Collins, my chief security officer, and briefed her. I called the Secretary General's office and explained everything. His response was immediate and clear: I'm coming there myself. I pored over the HOA bylaws with the same focus I used to negotiate international treaties. What I found made my anger boil over. Section 8.2 of their own documents exempted environmental and sustainability projects from enforcement. They hadn't just ignored that, they had knowingly broken international agreements and their own rules. At exactly 9 the next morning, my doorbell rang. Eleanor, Douglas, and 2 smug board members stood on my porch, already congratulating themselves. Eleanor's smile faltered when she saw my expression. "Ambassador Bennett," she cooed. "We see you've finally cleaned up that mess. The board appreciates your cooperation." I didn't invite them in. You didn't clean anything. You trespassed and poisoned crops that belong not just to me but to humanity. These were part of an official UN initiative. Douglas scoffed. We followed procedure. You ignored violation notices. The HOA has the right to act. Without a word, I played Victor's video on my phone. Their faces drained of color as they watched themselves commit the crime. That's an invasion of privacy. Eleanor sputtered. No, Eleanor, I said coldly. Breaking into someone's property and destroying protected crops, that's the invasion. Just then, a black SUV with diplomatic plates pulled up in front of my house. Maria stepped out, flanked by security agents. Ambassador, she said, scanning the group. Are these the individuals who destroyed UN property? I nodded slowly. They are. Douglas paled. UN property? This is a residential neighborhood. I handed him a folder. My garden was registered under the UN Global Seed Preservation Initiative. You didn't just kill plants. You may have violated international law. The color drained from Eleanor's face. How were we supposed to know? I tried to tell you. You chose to ignore me. Maria's phone buzzed. The Secretary General's team is arriving. And the media has been notified. Douglas grabbed Eleanor's arm, whispering furiously. Then he turned back, his voice shaking. Maybe we can resolve this quietly. The HOA is willing to offer you $500. I almost laughed. One purple carrot alone was worth $8,000. Maria gave me a curt nod. It's time to escalate this. And I was more than ready. 2 hours later, the Maple Ridge Community Center parking lot was unrecognizable. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Reporters loitered near the entrance, whispering into microphones and peering through windows. My neighbors gathered in clusters, some angry, some curious, others clearly frightened. Eleanor and Douglas had called an emergency HOA meeting, expecting to control the narrative. But I was about to make sure they lost control completely. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Eleanor sat at the head of the long table, flanked by the remaining board members. Douglas shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the confident arrogance from earlier replaced with barely concealed panic. The room quieted as I entered, accompanied by Maria and 2 members of my security team. Cameras clicked rapidly as reporters pressed against the glass doors. Eleanor banged her gavel, her voice brittle. "This meeting is called to order. We will be discussing recent community concerns regarding landscaping violations." I stepped forward, my voice carrying clearly. "No, Eleanor. We will be discussing your deliberate destruction of internationally protected property." Gasps rippled through the room. I turned my tablet to face the gathered crowd and tapped the screen. The projector flickered to life, showing the footage of Eleanor and Douglas trespassing into my garden, spraying toxic chemicals onto plants that represented years of research and hope. Murmurs turned to angry whispers. Eleanor slammed her gavel again. "This is irrelevant. The rules were violated, and we acted according to the bylaws." Victor, standing at the back of the room, raised his hand. "Actually, that's not true. Section 8.2 of your bylaws specifically exempts environmental conservation projects. You broke your own rules." I nodded to Maria, who handed out printed copies of the documentation to everyone present. "I'm not the only victim here," I continued. "This board has used selective enforcement to harass and fine vulnerable homeowners." Victor stepped forward, connecting his laptop to the projector. "What you're about to see," he said, his voice steady but fierce, "is evidence of a years-long scheme." The screen displayed spreadsheets showing hundreds of fines issued disproportionately to elderly residents, minorities, and single parents. Next to each entry, Victor had highlighted property acquisitions made by Montgomery Development Group, Douglas's company. The room erupted in outrage. I added quietly, "They've been driving people out to clear land for luxury condos. Properties they couldn't buy, they bullied into foreclosure." Eleanor tried to stand, but Victor raised his voice over the chaos. "There's more. All those fines you paid? They weren't going into community improvements. They were funneled into a shell company called Maple Enforcement Solutions LLC, registered under Eleanor's maiden name." A collective gasp filled the room, followed by stunned silence. I locked eyes with Eleanor. "You used your authority to exploit this community for personal gain." Douglas sputtered. "You can't prove." I cut him off, my tone cold and unyielding. "We have bank records. Transfers from that shell company directly to your private accounts. Payments for luxury vacations, designer clothing, and," I glanced at the screen, "a $14,000 spa retreat in Sedona." Shouts erupted from all corners. An elderly woman sobbed openly. I had to sell my car to pay those fines. The doors swung open again. 2 FBI agents stepped inside, their presence heavy with authority. Special Agent Porter introduced himself to the room. "We've been investigating financial irregularities tied to Montgomery Development. Today's testimony confirms federal offenses." Eleanor's composure shattered. "You can't do this." "Actually, we can," Agent Porter replied calmly. "And we will." Victor wasn't finished. He pulled up a property map on the projector, with certain lots marked in red. Every red property was targeted with excessive fines. "Look carefully," he said. "This isn't random. It's a blueprint for their condo development footprint." My corner lot was labeled Priority Target. Douglas's phone buzzed on the table. An incoming message lit up the screen, "Foreign transfer approved. Funds cleared." Agent Porter snatched the phone, his expression darkening as he read. This just became a national security investigation. Neighbors were on their feet now, voices raised in fury. They fined my grandson for parking his car in the driveway. They made me repaint my house 3 times. They towed my husband's car while approving identical violations for their friends. Eleanor bolted for the door. My security team intercepted her before she could reach the exit. Outside, reporters swarmed the windows, capturing every moment. Inside, the HOA board crumbled under the weight of truth. And still, I knew this wasn't over. Because Victor leaned in close and whispered, "We just found something in Eleanor's garage that changes everything." Victor's whisper sent a chill through me deeper than anything I'd felt that day. The outrage in the room had reached its peak, but his expression told me this went beyond petty corruption or local greed. We slipped quietly into the hallway, away from the chaos inside the community center. He handed me his tablet, his hand trembling ever so slightly. "Look at this," he said, barely above a whisper. On the screen was a series of documents recovered from Eleanor's garage, bank transfers, property acquisition contracts, and something far more sinister. The real owner of Montgomery Development Group wasn't just Douglas. The majority stakeholder was an entity registered in the Cayman Islands, connected to a shell company that traced back to a known foreign intelligence operative. A name I recognized immediately from my years at the UN, Viktor Shevchenko, a sanctioned Russian oligarch involved in espionage activities. I swallowed hard, forcing down the surge of adrenaline. My small neighborhood dispute had just exploded into an international security breach. "We need to call Washington immediately," I said, my voice steady only from habit. Maria had already anticipated the order. She was on the phone with the State Department, speaking in clipped, urgent tones. Inside the meeting hall, Agent Porter and his team were detaining Douglas, reading him his rights as neighbors watched, stunned into silence. Eleanor sat in a chair, her head in her hands, trembling. Her defiance had finally cracked. As we re-entered the room, Agent Porter met my gaze with a grim nod. "We've confirmed foreign financial involvement. This is no longer just HOA fraud, it's federal." His earpiece crackled, and he turned away to receive new orders. Outside, more black SUVs pulled up. Department of Homeland Security agents stepped out, their presence causing a ripple of whispers through the crowd. A female agent approached me directly. "Ambassador Bennett, I'm Agent Kelly Grant. We need you to come with us." Victor and I exchanged a look. We both knew this story had outgrown our neighborhood. In the secure conference room at the federal field office, the scope of what had happened was laid bare. Viktor Shevchenko had been using Douglas's company as a real estate front to purchase properties near sensitive government and research facilities under the guise of luxury development. Maple Ridge Estates was just one piece of a sprawling infiltration scheme. Eleanor, initially complicit for greed, had become an unwitting pawn in something far larger than she could ever control. Director Elaine Carter of the FBI sat across from me, sliding a thick dossier across the table. "Ambassador, your garden poisoning was the spark that lit a fuse. We've been tracking Shevchenko's efforts for months, but this gave us the break we needed." She opened a file showing photos of other properties under quiet foreign ownership, all near military installations or scientific research hubs. And it all started, I thought bitterly, with a woman obsessed with uniform lawns. Back in Maple Ridge, agents executed search warrants at Douglas's offices. Reports poured in that additional board members had accepted bribes. Several resigned on the spot, others were led away in cuffs. News helicopters hovered overhead, broadcasting live as what had begun as HOA tyranny turned into the largest domestic corruption scandal the state had seen in decades. I returned to my home late that night, exhausted but not defeated. In the dark, I walked the perimeter of my poisoned garden, the acrid smell still faint in the soil. Yet there, bathed in moonlight, a single stubborn seedling pushed through, the Himalayan blue poppy. Resilient. Defiant. A quiet reminder that even the worst poison couldn't kill everything worth saving. And now, it was my turn to make sure nothing like this ever took root again. Spring arrived in Maple Ridge with a strange sense of peace. Where chaos once reigned, the sound of laughter and new life filled the streets. The HOA was officially dissolved by court order, replaced by a community land trust overseen by neighbors, not dictators. The garden, once poisoned and left for dead, had been transformed into a living research hub. Scientists from the UN worked alongside volunteers, and children from the neighborhood took weekend tours to learn about biodiversity and resilience. The single surviving Himalayan blue poppy had multiplied under careful cultivation, its seeds now destined for drought-stricken regions in need of water-purifying crops. In the final weeks before my return to the UN, I stood beside Victor and Mrs. Jenkins at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new Biodiversity Education Center, built right where my raised beds had once stood. The Secretary General attended in person, planting the first official tree. What began as an act of petty cruelty had become a symbol of international cooperation and hope. Reporters asked me how it felt to have a neighborhood dispute become a global conversation. I simply said, sometimes the smallest seeds grow into something unstoppable, especially when watered with truth. But just as I thought the chapter was closing, Victor approached me with one last discovery. Hidden in Eleanor's files was evidence that their development scheme wasn't limited to Maple Ridge. It was part of a network spanning multiple states, targeting vulnerable communities. The Department of Justice was opening a national investigation, and my case would be used as the foundation for sweeping reforms across the country. As the sun set over a garden now thriving beyond anything I'd imagined, I couldn't help but wonder how many others were still out there, fighting small, lonely battles against unchecked power. Have you ever felt powerless against HOA tyranny or a Karen who thought the rules only applied to others? Share your story in the comments. I have a feeling we're just getting started.